Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon of the Chabad House of Damar, and we have a very special guest with us, Rabbi Eliyahu Friedman. Welcome to the Jewish View.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, I brought him on the Jewish View, even though he's a nice guy, but he does have an interesting idea, and that is actually he wrote a book. If you can imagine that, he's a young person, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. And the context of the book is the coming of the Moshiach, about the Messiah's imminent coming. And, go ahead, tell us a little bit about the summary of your book, and also why did you want to write about this book?
Okay, sure. Well, like you said, the book is about Moshiach, about the Messiah, and different ways that he can come. It's in Hebrew called Eifane B'Yasago, which is the ways of the coming of the Messiah, so it's kind of a giveaway about what the book's about. But it particularly focuses on a specific, a few variations of a specific way, which is the idea that Mashiach could come from the dead, which is a debated topic amongst rabbis and whatnot. But I wanted to kind of flush out the idea because it's hard to find good subject matter.
Someone was just recently talking to me, and the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, was always, if you could say, pushing for Messiah is coming, Mashiach is coming, and they said, well, it's a newer concept, and I said, no, it really wasn't. It was just emphasized. Maybe you just start from the beginning about the basic Judaism, about is it a New Age thing? Did Lubavitch come up with this idea? Or what is really the history of that we're waiting for an ultimate redemption through a human being, not just a utopian era?
Right. It's a good question. Really, in the beginning of the book, I kind of lay out, in order to get to the part that I want to talk about in the book, I have to kind of preface on a bunch of different things in order to get people there. So me and my co-author, actually, Rabbi Menachem Borenstein from Poughkeepsie. So basically, the way that we laid it out was we started off talking about, there's an idea of an age of Mashiach that when everything will be completed and the purpose of the world will be revealed. But the way in which the hope for this belief was expressed kind of took different forms. So you have, for example, I know that you wanted me to talk about the idea. So
the basic idea
right.
about what Judaism holds
Right.
as an article of faith,
right,
about the coming of the Messiah.
right. It's definitely a big part of Judaism. It's the end goal, so to speak. When everything's kind of centered and balanced, and the world doesn't make a lot of sense right now. But it's kind of when everything realigns and enters what it's supposed to be, and that's ushered about through a person. I don't know how much detail you want about that, but there's.
Well, it's important because we should have a little bit of detail, because it's just any ignoramus, as other religions do have. Oh, I have a vision and I'm making the world better.
Right.
So contrasting that to Judaism.
Right. I don't know. It's.
Well, what does the Rambam say? You have the Maimonides is the most basic. It's the most mainstream Judaism as you can have.
Right.
And like I said, the basic Judaism. And it's not New Age, even though it's really, Judaism is held by it right from the beginning of creation. There was always this end goal of a utopian era through the Mashiach.
Right.
On the other hand, again, the Rambam's only, if you can only say that, 1,000 years ago. But he at least delineates it clear as a bell, and nobody argues with it. Like I said, it's the most basic Judaism.
Right.
So what are the qualifications that
in terms of qualifications,
Rambam, Maimonides?
Right. So like you mentioned, the belief has been around. The Rambam mentions that there's specific references in the Torah to Mashiach, which are more allusions to, more vague, but they're fleshed out a lot in the prophets. But he is able to abstract from there a bunch of different particular criteria, that he has to be a king, that a leader, and that he has to make sure Jews get back on track and start keeping observance of Jewish tradition, and he fights the wars of God, that he himself is a very learned person, and that's kind of a first stage. And then after that, he has to succeed in all these things in a very broad way, rebuild the temple in its place, gather the Jewish people to Israel, and at that point, we know he's the guy.
Well, you know, that, again, when I was talking before, I mean, then many people say, well, maybe there'll be a Messianic era of a utopian. You know,
Right.
the United Nations will bring us peace. I mean, I'm being sarcastic about it.
Right.
But in any case, there are people who believe that people will evolve enough to make peace and prosperity. And there is a lot of allusions to that. Again, like I said, there are Maimonides. There will be food for everybody. There will be people will be prosperous,
Right.
and there will be peace. But it's like you say, it's almost like a fantasy nowadays to say there's peace. There's war here, war there, all over the world. There's wars
Yeah.
and there's conflicts, and how is anybody going to bring any? Who you are? But stay tuned, as I always say over here.
Right.
I mean, exactly how it's going to happen. There's always many people that have ideas, and maybe we are closer in many senses.
Right.
The Rebbe said we are closer to the coming of the Messiah, the Moshiach. Doesn't mean we're there yet, to say the very least. Many people in Israel will say, look, well, now we have a land of Israel, which is incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just even 100 years ago, to say there's going to be a land that's going to be prosperous and a leading in many different fields and areas. Again, it would have been a fantasy,
Right.
but it's a reality. So
Yeah.
things happen.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because the Rambam, you talk about it kind of being almost like a fantasy, kind of beyond our understanding. The Rambam was really of the opinion that it was a very natural process. And I guess in his time it was a lot easier to appreciate the idea of kings and wars. And I mean, nowadays it's kind of removed from us a little bit, even that.
Certain things that, I have talked about in many things that, I mean, again, you say it's far away from being peace, but the prosperity is incredible nowadays.
Yeah.
That, and even, I mean, again, I try to be a little bit in a fantasy, but there are modern scientific thinkers that things will be done by robotics. You won't have to drive a car, and this is reality now. Just hop into your car, oh, I want to go here, and the car is going to move. And how much food is being produced. I know there's people, I mean, even in the capital, this is where in the United States, we're not in Biafra, that are lacking food, but that's distribution also.
Mm-hmm.
It's not God's world, or even the scientists, they know how to grow food, and there's a prosperous, they say 1/3 of the produce the United States produces is consumed, 1/3 only.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a matter of distribution, it's a matter of different ways to get around it. I mean, there's
Right.
just, more and more, there are ways to see, that if you think about it, again, I try to tell young people that they just think, oh yeah, sure, I have a computer in my hand and that's
Right.
what it is, and then people were joking with me before. You remember what a rotary phone was, I mean, I tell everybody I'm 29.
I barely
but-
remember what.
Yeah, I tell them I'm 29, but my white beard gives it away a little bit.
Uh-huh.
But in any case, yeah, I mean, if you would think about 50, 60 years ago, I'm not even talking 2,000 years ago, you would say it's a wondrous world. So,
Yeah.
again, no one likes wars, and the Rambam promises there won't be any more wars. There'll be peace in the world. There'll be prosperity. No one wants to see anybody going hungry. So that's a basic need of a person. but we're getting there in a certain sense.
Yeah, for sure. We're for sure getting there. You can kind of see the connection from our time to what Mashiach could be like. We're starting to appreciate conceptually that this is right on the edge, right on the cusp. I don't think obviously that these things, like the fact that we have a bunch of food and stuff, is the ultimate expression of that. I think a lot of people think it's just going to be robotics, or it's just going to be like technology that helps us live forever or something, but it's really ultimately going to be a miraculous thing even beyond nature. And so the book actually gets into one of the ways of Mashiach being miraculous, is the idea that he could
So tell us about it.
be a resurrected person. I mean, there's various different ways. The general way the format of the book is that it says it's the idea that Mashiach comes from the dead, and so that could actually really happen in a few different ways. You could have the idea of him literally resurrecting, but you could also have the idea of him descending from heaven, whether he went up completely or he comes down and kind of encloses himself in some mystical spiritual body of some kind. You've had people defend various
just to
versions,
say that,
yeah.
you know, again, going back to Maimonides, so no one can argue, it's just the most basic Judaism you can get.
Right.
And we just were saying that there is this idea of belief that there's going to be a Savior, a Moshiach, a Messiah, you know, getting us peace and prosperity. But together with that, the 13th article of the 13 Articles of Faith is the resurrection of the dead. So it's not, again, some kind of craziness that someone brought up. Again, it's basic Judaism. Again, how it's going to happen
Right.
is a subject in its own right. But
Right.
but to say, yo, come on, you got a person's dead and gone, they're turned to dust. How is it going to be resurrection? Again, it is a fantasy in one sense, but again, the other hand, it's a basic
Right.
belief.
Right, yeah, I mean, the book really is talking to people who presumably already accept the idea there'll be a resurrection. It's kind of building on that and explaining how that could be coupled with the idea that Mashiach could be one of those. But yeah, I mean, for sure, you have to know that there's a resurrection in general, and that people, even in the past, have been resurrected. The Rebbe mentioned a few times places in the Talmud that talk about how people were resurrected over 1,000 years ago. A lot of people talk about the Valley of Dry Bones, as they like to call it, where the people so there's arguments
In
whether
the
it's
book
literal
of
or not
Ezekiel,
literal. Right.
people, if you read in the book of Ezekiel.
Right. So people might be familiar. And there's different commentaries to say maybe it was like, you know, a metaphorical thing God was showing them, or were they actually resurrected? And so in that case, if you take that route, then people were also resurrected back then for a time.
Well, that's why I try to, again, go to again, maybe you can look at scientifically. I mean, again, we're not going to be like the Flintstones, go back to the, you know, barbarian. Well, we'll have computers, you know,
Right.
they're not going to say, I'll get rid of these computers, get rid of all this technology. But also, you could also say we're getting closer, you know, that they take DNA from some 2,000-year-old date tree or something in Israel, and now they have a living date tree.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe just to get a little DNA. Again, it's not even that outlandish. You know, scientifically, if you told a scientist, you think that we can get, you know, a piece of bone or something, a DNA from something, and have it grow, they'd say, yeah, we have done it, and, you know, at a basic, minor level, maybe a tree here and a sheep there. But yeah, you know, they wouldn't say you're totally nuts and crazy to even think about that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it definitely used to be harder to understand. It's slowly becoming easier, for sure. Yeah.
So what are the guidelines in Judaism, according to your book, about who would be the Mashiach? Or there are definite guidelines. I mean, this is what your book is trying to portray.
It gets out of guidelines. I mean, there's a brief introduction that I made reference to earlier, where it gets into the idea of wanting Mashiach in general. Because there's a whole question: how can you say that one of the principles of faith is not believing in the concept of the Messiah coming, but awaiting his coming? It's a whole question. And so we happen to give an answer in our book, which we feel like is one of many possible answers. But from there, you see that there's really an emphasis on waiting and wanting. And so people did that in various ways, and it showed up in various ways. People tried to calculate end times throughout history to see when exactly Mashiach could come, and if it's going to be soon or later. And there's people who did various things. There's like flags that people would make that actually they have in the Maharal Shul now. They have on display
In Prague.
In Prague, which was to give chizuk to the idea of Mashiach, which the Rebbe mentions in a talk. And people also waited and tried to look for who amongst us could possibly be the person who will lead us out. And so usually they picked their teacher or someone that they thought was really holy in their time. And typically, if it was kind of a sect of some kind who had a replacement, so the followers would naturally say, okay, so the replacement is now the new person who we think might be. But on occasion, there were people who still stuck with their original person. One of them was actually the son of the Ruzhiner. The Ruzhiner was a very holy person, the Tzemach Tzedek.
About the early 1800s.
Right, the third Lubavitcher Rebbe said about him that we should call him the Heilige Ruzhiner, the Holy Ruzhiner, because he was just a very, very holy person, and everyone respected him at the time. And he had a few sons. One of the sons was the Stefanischer Rebbe, and he had written after the passing of his father that in the year of whatever the year was, that everyone thought that my father would be Mashiach, and when he passed away, people kind of forgot about the idea. They moved on, but he said really it's still true, and he gave various arguments for why it's still true. But he clearly held of it, and there was also about the Baal Shem Tov, that Rabbi Nachman of Chernobyl also thought about the Baal Shem Tov, that he would be Mashiach after he passed away. So it's definitely been expressed in the past for sure.
If you think,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a logical conclusion, because if someone you pick as a leader or
Yeah.
a mentor, then he's the greatest person in the world. He's the holiest man. That's
Right.
who you're going to pick. Or
Right.
you pick someone else, you pick the best. Well, if he's the best, that's really the Mashiach. Again, it doesn't, I mean, you're saying he comes from a cloud or resurrection from death, but it
Right.
could be just very, I don't know if say normal enough, but it could be the greatest rabbi in the generation. So if you think he's your teacher is the greatest rabbi in the generation, well, it's like I say, it's the next conclusion would be,
Right.
then he's probably the Mashiach.
Right. So some people did take that route, and it could have been there was more. Obviously, we don't know. Not everyone recorded everything that they thought all the time. It's lucky that we even have what we have historically. But there were people who didn't have a particular candidate in mind, or tried to bring proofs from the prophets, because it talks about King David being the leader for them in the future, and so a lot of people say this isn't so literal. But there are people that say it is literal, and there are people that defend that. And one of the interesting things that I found when I was going through research for the book was I didn't realize how many people actually, in practice, thought this was how Mashiach would come. I found person after person after person documenting that people in their time, even if they didn't agree with these people and they said that they were wrong for thinking it, although there were people who also defended and said that they were right for thinking it, but all of them agreed that there was a bunch of people thinking it. So what's really interesting about this is that there's kind of been a revisionist history over the years, and you could attribute it to various things. A part of it could be the rise of missionary work and Jews needing to feel like they have to defend their faith in some way. And so the easiest way was just to go, well, anything about coming and going out of this world is not possible, and it's just a living person, and that's that. And it might have been useful for anti-missionary purposes of some kind, but if you go back far enough when people were, I don't know, you could say freer to talk, but also not freer to talk, because the world was a lot less free back in the day. But before they had a real approach as to how to address claims for different religions, so they were kind of more free with what they thought, and open to just kind of see things as they are. And a lot of people thought that, based on everything that they read, that Mashiach would be a person who was no longer alive. And this took different forms and different people. Maybe it was King David, maybe it was the prophet Daniel, maybe it was their rabbi personally. They didn't really have a specific person. There's actually one source that I bring in the book from the 1700s who says that just like the end time isn't known, so too the person who Mashiach is not known. And whoever it is welcome. He says whether it's Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, whether it's the people who are mentioned in Tractate Sanhedrin. There's various schools of people who said about their rebbes, whether it's King David, anyone who comes is welcome, and that's like the approach you should take. So he clearly was open to anybody.
Well, you're right. It's very important. And just to say, round out the full idea, there were false messiahs. I mean, the Jewish people were many times oppressed. Well, we just had the Holocaust,
Right.
80 years ago.
Right.
So we don't have to go. And they were oppressed in Russia. People's grandparents remember that.
Right.
The Tsar and the pogroms. And throughout history, and that there has been troubles, and people are always looking for a way out, so to speak.
Right.
Someone's going to save me and get me out of this, troubles and all my problems. So again, this leads to some person saying, "Oh, here I am. I'm the Messiah."
Right.
So all right, we'll take it. And there have been many false messiahs, and then like you're saying, in contradiction to that, the Jewish tradition would say, and the rabbis at that time would say, well, this guy's no Moshiach. This guy's no Messiah. What is he doing? He's charismatic. You see it nowadays also. You have people with false notions leading people to do the wrong things. I mean, that's what happened. It happened in Jewish life too.
Right.
So therefore, like you say, in a little bit, that's why the Orthodox Jews, the Torah Jews, went the other way.
Right.
And they just didn't want to accept, of course, you got to believe in Mashiach. Again, I've been saying it's a
Right.
Rambam. You can't say it's baloney, we don't believe in it. But it's not, it's going to come in a normal way and trying to disrupt this idea, because they were major movements in Israel.
Right.
Not in Israel, but in
All over.
amongst the Jews.
Yeah.
That there were in Israel that people saying, the Messiah, and it brought a lot of difficulties to Jewish people during those times. Again, we forget about 300 years ago, but it's still, 300 years is real history. And
Right.
but then the Rebbe was always innovative. He didn't mind that he had to make something revolutionary, that something was different and deeper, and he went for the truth. And some people didn't like it. They didn't, he'd answer them up. He says, what I'm
Right.
doing is according to Torah. Yes, it's a little different. It's a little bit, radical. On the other hand, it's allowed. So.
Right, yeah. I mean, I mentioned a specific possible reason why they might veer away over time and eventually forget, excuse me, that there is an option to say that Mashiach could be a deceased individual, but what you're really saying goes even deeper than that, and it really gets to why a lot of Jews have trouble accepting that Mashiach could be an imminent thing, is because there's so many fakes before, so many jump scares that it kind of ruined a lot of people's lives, and it made things very difficult for a while, and people are afraid to kind of re-explore that. The possibility
Well, it's
that Mashiach
close
could
to
come any
other
moment.
religions also.
Right, I mean,
So
over
therefore
time.
they don't, again,
Yeah.
there's so many Jewish people, unfortunately, that are just taken up with Christianity and missionary works.
Right.
So again, the Orthodox, all right, we'll move away from that. We won't deal with that.
Right.
Even though certain things, they're right. Just, I remember one Jewish magazine this many years ago that they were talking about the Messiah. And someone wrote a letter to the editor, I'm so surprised at you that you're dealing with such a Christian idea as the Messiah, because that's all they ever heard. They didn't hear, they don't teach in Hebrew school that the Messiah is going to come. They always hear it from, the Christians. So they had to write back, no, it's not a Christian idea. It's a Jewish idea that Christians took. So again, that's what I'm saying. There's an idea of moving away from, controversy. Even though, I mean, it
Right.
is what it is. You're
Right.
going to dump out the Messiah because someone else took, this idea. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, there's a comment that the late Manuel Schoch had made, and recently Rabbi, what's his name, Rabbi Yitzhak Breitowitz, who's been going around lately, good guy, very nice guy. I've had correspondence with him, and he actually wrote something that I quote in the book. But he said, people come with this claim that the idea of Moshiach, and specifically perhaps certain ways that he could come, are like Christian. So it's not for Jews to believe. And he's like, so what if it's Christian? Christians also believe in the Ten Commandments. We believe in the Ten Commandments. You're going to drop those because other people also believe them? The question is if we have sources in our own tradition for the same belief. And, we could part or agree on whatever we part and agree on. But it's not how, we don't define Judaism by its differences with Christianity. We define Judaism by what Judaism says about Judaism. And if it happens to be we agree on something, okay, very nice, we agree on something. But if not, then we don't. There's plenty of things, we don't agree on. We're obviously different religions, but.
Well, it's good that you're writing the book, because the trouble is, really, people are, and I'm talking about even Jewish people, ignorant, like I was saying, Messiah, Mashiach, Savior, what are you talking about? That's Christian, or, they know more about Christianity than the Jews know about Judaism in many senses.
Right.
So you have a lot of missionaries, they'll say, oh, Isaiah, and, oh, that's beautiful, those prophecies. I say, well, he's a Jewish prophet, what do you have to go there? But they never were taught, and therefore, you got this kind of animosity towards, really was according to Judaism, but Judaism says the right thing, and like we were both saying, we're not going to cut out basic beliefs just because someone took this idea. In any case, that's really a forward thinking also, because I always say that before Christianity, which was 2,000 years ago, people were believing, as you can go to a museum, there's a museum here in Albany, they're believing in cats with the Egyptians, that's a god. A horse's head with a lion's body, Greek mythology, and this is so ignorant. And really, it's a step forward, and the Rambam says that also. It's a step forward that at least they're believing half-truths, that there is a Messiah coming. Who he is a different story, but at least, they're not believing these kind of idols that they believed into. You want to sum up? We only have a few minutes left, and maybe summarize the conclusion of your book, if there is a conclusion. The Rebbe always said, from enough talking, we've been talking for a half hour, let it come out to action. And
Right.
talking is nice, but we want to see it. But still, what are the points of your book, if you want to summarize them?
Well, I took a modest route, and I basically say that the most that we can get from everything that me and my co-author bring is that there were people throughout the ages who defended various versions of the idea that Moshiach could be someone not from this world. Moshiach could also be someone from this world, as we know from various sources, but there were, at least even until recently, even until this century, rabbis who defended this idea. And it's never really been something which everyone dismissed or decided against. In Jewish tradition, there could be things which were acceptable for a time and which were allowed for a time, but then the rabbis have some discussions. They figure out, okay, no, from now on, or actually we all agree that this isn't the way to interpret it or understand it. And so people might think this is one of those issues, and especially, you mentioned the Rambam. The Rambam is an authoritative source on the idea of Mashiach and his coming. And so some people think that, based on their reading of it, that certain options are no longer acceptable once that has been the standard accepted by all of world Jewry. And if you accept that, so then you have a hard time explaining how there's so many people that I quote in the book after the Rambam who are still defending this. So there must be, and you can tell, I don't flush them out. I let them speak for themselves, most of them, basically. A few footnotes here and there, but you can tell that they have different ways of kind of dealing with that or answering that. Some of them openly, some of them you could just kind of figure out what they're trying to get at with the way that they're saying it. And at the end of the day, I say, look, I'm quoting from everybody. If you're from this sect or you're from this sect, I have someone for you, and someone who you respect, who, you know, agreed with this or said it was possible or is open to it. And so at the end of the day, you know, you have to figure out if it matches your hashkafas and what you think, and if you're convinced or not. But you let the book decide for you.
All right, very good. Rabbi Eliyahu Friedman, we'd like to thank you for being Jewish View, and I'm sure on behalf of all our viewers that we have, you know, they understand a little bit more about the Messiah's role in Judaism. So thank you very much for
No
being
problem.
here.